My phone buzzed against the polished mahogany of my desk, shattering the careful silence I'd been maintaining all morning. The screen lit up with Megan's name, and something cold settled in my stomach before I even answered. "Lauren?" Her voice cracked on my name. "Lauren, I need you." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, already standing, already reaching for my purse. "What happened? Where are you?" "St. Mary's Hospital. A sob cut through whatever she was trying to say. "These guys, they came out of nowhere when I was walking back from the library. They wanted my laptop and phone, and when I tried to hold on to my bag, one of them pushed me and I fell and—" "Are you hurt?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, fear manifesting as anger. "My ribs. They think one's broken. Lauren, they're saying I may require surgery if the lung doesn't re-expand. They won't do it without—" Another sob. "They're asking for $12,000 up front. The insurance won't cover it because the deductible is so high and—" "I'm coming. Stay there. I'll figure it out." I ended the call before she could hear the panic in my breathing. $12,000. The number echoed in my head like a death sentence. I had maybe $300 in my checking account. Everything else went to Megan's tuition at the university, her textbooks, her rent in the dorms. Being her guardian for the past 9 years since our parents died meant every penny I earned had a predetermined destination, and there was never anything left over. I'd been working as executive secretary to Dominic Bellini for 6 months now. The salary of $7,200 monthly had seemed like a fortune when I'd accepted the position, but that was before I understood how expensive keeping a 19-year-old on a pre-law track in college actually was. The office around me buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Bellini Imports occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, all glass and steel, and expensive artwork that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. But I'd learned not to think about things like that. Learned to keep my head down, manage Dominic's calendar, screen his calls, and ignore the subtle signs that his import business dealt in more than just legitimate goods. The men who visited wore tailored suits and spoke in careful code. The phone calls that came through after hours always made his voice drop to something cold and final. The way security at the front desk checked IDs and bags with thoroughness that seemed excessive for a simple import company. I noticed these things, filed them away in the back of my mind, and chose not to examine them too closely because I needed this job. Now, I needed it even more desperately. I smoothed down my charcoal gray suit jacket, checked that my blonde hair was still neatly twisted in its professional bun, and walked toward Dominic's office. His door was closed, which meant he was either in a meeting or working on something that required privacy. My hand hovered over the handle, trembling slightly. "Just ask. You've been a good employee. 6 months of never being late, never missing a deadline, managing his impossible schedule with precision. Surely that's worth something." But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't enough. Dominic Bellini was not a man who bent rules for anyone. I'd seen him fire someone for being 10 minutes late 3 times, watched him cut off a supplier who'd delivered a shipment 2 days behind schedule, ending a relationship that had apparently lasted 15 years. He was exacting, controlled, and utterly without sentiment when it came to business matters. And asking for a salary advance was definitely a business matter. My vision blurred suddenly, tears burning hot behind my eyes. No, not here. Not now. I blinked hard, trying to force them back, but my body had apparently decided it was done holding everything together. The stress of the past 6 months, the constant juggling of bills and schedules, the weight of being solely responsible for Megan's future, and now this crisis that I had absolutely no solution for. It all crashed over me at once. I turned away from Dominic's door, walking quickly down the hallway before anyone could see me losing it. The bathroom was occupied, someone's heels clicking on tile behind the closed door. I couldn't wait. Couldn't stand in the hallway with tears streaming down my face while junior associates walked past and pretended not to notice. The supply closet was 3 doors down. I'd been in there dozens of times, retrieving printer paper or file folders, or the expensive pens Dominic preferred for signing documents. It was cramped, lined floor to ceiling with metal shelves stocked with office supplies, but it had a door that locked from the inside. I slipped in, twisted the lock and let myself collapse against the wall next to a box of manila envelopes. The tears came in earnest then, silent sobs that shook my whole body. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to muffle the sounds, my other arm wrapped around my middle as if I could physically hold myself together. Not here. Not like this. I couldn't leave Megan alone to finish a degree and a life we'd been building one rent check at a time. Megan was hurt. My baby sister, who'd been only 10 years old when I'd suddenly become her sole guardian, who'd trusted me to take care of her, to keep her safe. And I'd failed. I couldn't even come up with $12,000 to fix her displaced rib. What kind of guardian was I? What kind of sister? The shelves pressed against my back, cold metal through the thin fabric of my blouse. The closet smelled like paper and toner and the faint chemical scent of cleaning supplies. I focused on these details, trying to ground myself, to stop the spiral of panic threatening to pull me under completely. I don't know how long I stayed there. Could have been minutes or hours. Time had that elastic quality that comes with crisis, stretching and compressing unpredictably. Eventually, the tears slowed. My breathing steadied. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, knowing my makeup was probably ruined but unable to care very much. I needed to get back to my desk. Needed to call the hospital and tell them I was working on getting the money. Buy myself time to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Maybe I could get a loan. Maybe I could... The door handle rattled. I froze. Hand still pressed against my wet cheek. The lock held, but someone was definitely trying to open the door. It's locked. Dominic's voice came from the other side, calm and matter-of-fact. Oh God. Of course it would be him. Of course my boss would be the one to find me hiding in a supply closet, crying like a child. I'm sorry, I called out, my voice hoarse and embarrassingly shaky. I'll be out in a minute. Lauren. The way he said my name made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Open the door. I stood on trembling legs, swiped uselessly at my face again, and unlocked the door. It swung open, revealing Dominic Bellini in all his imposing glory. At 35 years old, he looked like he'd been carved from marble by an artist with a particular fondness for sharp angles. 6'2", broad shoulders that filled out his custom suits perfectly, dark brown hair always impeccably styled. His eyes were a lighter brown, almost amber in certain light, and they missed absolutely nothing. A thin vertical scar marked his chin on the right side, the only imperfection in an otherwise flawless facade. Right now, those amber eyes were locked on my face, taking in my red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks with an expression I couldn't quite read. Come with me. He turned and walked back toward his office without checking to see if I'd follow. I didn't have a choice. Dominic Bellini was not a man people said no to. And besides, I was fairly certain I was about to be fired for using company time to have a breakdown in the supply closet. Perfect. Just perfect. Now I wouldn't even have a salary to try to scrape together Megan's surgery money. I followed him down the hallway, acutely aware of the curious glances from other employees. Anthony, Dominic's right-hand man, watched us pass with his usual unreadable expression. 42 years old and built like someone who'd spent significant time enforcing rules with his fists. He nodded once to Dominic, who ignored him completely. Dominic's private office was exactly what you'd expect from a man like him. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive desk of dark wood that looked like it had cost more than a car, leather furniture arranged with geometric precision, art on the walls that I suspected was original rather than prints, though I didn't know enough about art to be sure. He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I sat, back straight, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for judgment. Which, I supposed, I was. Dominic settled into his own chair, leaned back and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. He was good at this, I'd noticed, using silence as a weapon, making people so nervous they'd start talking just to fill the void. I kept my mouth shut. If he wanted to fire me, he could do it without me making it easier for him. What happened? He finally asked. Not what I'd expected. I'd anticipated anger, maybe disgust at my unprofessional behavior. Not this calm, almost gentle question. Personal matter, I managed. It won't happen again. That's not what I asked. His voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. What happened? I'd never been good at lying, especially not to someone who made their living reading people. The truth spilled out before I could stop it. My sister was assaulted. She's in the hospital with a displaced rib. They're saying she may require surgery if the lung doesn't re-expand, but it costs $12,000 up front, and I don't have it. The words came faster, panic bleeding through. I was going to ask you for a salary advance, but I know that's probably against policy. And I understand if that's not possible. I just needed a minute to compose myself before. Stop. He held up one hand, and I fell silent immediately. Your sister. She's 19, correct? Law student at the university? I nodded, surprised he knew that. I'd mentioned Megan maybe twice in passing during the 6 months I'd worked here. Dominic leaned forward, pressed a button on his desk phone. Anthony, clear my schedule for the rest of the day. Sir? Anthony's voice came through the speaker. You heard me. Cancel everything. I'll handle the Marchetti situation tomorrow. He released the button before Anthony could respond, those amber eyes returning to my face. Here's what's going to happen, Lauren. His words hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Dominic stood, moved to the window overlooking the city, hands in his pockets. The afternoon sun cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting that scar on his chin. I'll pay for your sister's surgery. All of it. $12,000 up front, plus whatever additional costs arise during her recovery. He said it like he was discussing lunch plans, not offering to solve my impossible crisis. I'll also arrange for premium health insurance for both of you, effective immediately. Your salary will increase to $9,000 per month. My breath caught. $9,000. That was nearly $2,000 more than I currently made. With that kind of money, I could actually save something. Build an emergency fund. Stop living one unexpected expense away from disaster. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. He turned to face me, amber eyes unreadable. Because I'm going to ask something of you in return, and it's only fair you're compensated appropriately. There it was. The catch. Nothing in life came free. Especially not from men like Dominic Bellini. What do you want? My voice steadied. Some part of me recognizing this was a negotiation now, not a mercy. You've been an excellent secretary. Efficient, discreet, never asking questions you shouldn't ask. He moved closer, perched on the edge of his desk so he was looking down at me. I need someone I can trust in a more sensitive role. My personal assistant. You'd handle all aspects of my business operations, not just the legitimate ones. The admission landed like a stone in still water. He was confirming what I'd suspected for months, acknowledging the truth we'd both carefully avoided. You're saying your business isn't entirely legal. I'm saying my business is complex. There are aspects that operate in gray areas, arrangements that benefit all parties involved, but wouldn't necessarily satisfy every letter of federal law. His voice remained calm, measured. If you accept this position, you'll be privy to information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. You'll see things, hear things, know things that must remain absolutely confidential. And if I refuse, then I'll wish you well in your job search, provide a glowing reference, and you can leave here today with no hard feelings. But your sister's surgery won't be my problem to solve. Brutal honesty. I could respect that, even if I hated the position it put me in. How long would I be committed to this role? 2 years minimum. After that, if you want to leave, I'll help you transition wherever you want to go. Better job, different city, whatever you need. But those 2 years, you're mine. The possessive way he said it sent a shiver down my spine that I chose to ignore. I thought of Megan lying in a hospital bed, in pain, scared. Thought of the staggering debt that would crush us both if I walked away. Thought of my mediocre savings and the impossible task of finding $12,000 by tomorrow. What exactly would I be doing? Specifically. Dominic pulled out his phone, tapped something, and showed me the screen. A bank transfer interface. My name already entered in the recipient field, the amount reading $12,000 even. I could send this right now. Have Anthony arrange for your sister's transfer to Mercy Heights Private Hospital, where the surgeons are better, and she'll have a private room. Surgery could happen tonight. He lowered the phone. Or you can walk away, and we'll both pretend this conversation never happened. You didn't answer my question. A slight smile touched his lips, gone so fast I almost missed it. You'd manage my calendar, all appointments both legitimate and otherwise. Handle correspondence that requires discretion. Sit in on certain meetings where your presence would be beneficial. Manage documentation for various business arrangements. Essentially, you'd see the full picture of my operations, instead of just the sanitized version. Illegal operations. Morally ambiguous operations, he corrected. I don't deal in anything that directly harms people. No drugs, no trafficking, no violence for the sake of violence. But I do control interests in areas that law enforcement would prefer remained outside private hands. Port access, certain import channels, security services for businesses that operate in contested territories, protection rackets, money laundering through legitimate businesses, import operations that probably didn't declare every container to customs. I wasn't stupid. I could read between the lines. And if I'm caught, you won't be. I've been doing this for 15 years without incident. I'm careful, methodical, and I protect my people. His expression hardened slightly. But I need absolute loyalty. No talking to authorities, no keeping personal records, no sharing information with anyone outside my organization. Can you do that? Could I? Could I knowingly become complicit in illegal activities, even if they were the victimless variety he described? I looked at the phone still in his hand, at that number that represented Megan's immediate future, looked at Dominic's face, trying to find deception or malice there, found only calculation and something that might have been genuine concern. Yes, the word came out steadier than I felt. I can do that. He pressed send on the transfer without breaking eye contact. Done. Give me your sister's information. Anthony will handle the rest. I rattled off Megan's details from memory, watched Dominic relay them through his phone via text. Less than 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a response. Anthony's sending a medical transport to St. Mary's now. They'll have your sister at Mercy Heights within the hour. Dr. Rashid is one of the best thoracic surgeons in the state. He'll assess her personally and schedule surgery for tonight if her condition allows. The relief that washed over me was so intense I felt dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still need to discuss the terms of your employment. He pulled a document from his desk drawer, already prepared. Of course it was. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision on his part. He'd been planning this, waiting for the right moment. The contract was surprisingly straightforward. 2-year commitment, $9,000 monthly salary, full health coverage for me and one dependent, performance bonuses at his discretion. A confidentiality clause that was ironclad and would survive even after the employment term ended. A severance package if either party chose not to renew after the initial 2 years that was far more generous than anything I'd expected. You had this ready. It wasn't a question. I've been considering offering you this position for a while now. Your dedication to your sister, your work ethic, your ability to remain composed under pressure. These are qualities I value. Today just accelerated the timeline. I scanned the document again, looking for hidden clauses or gotchas. Found nothing that wasn't exactly what he'd verbally agreed to. If I sign this, when do I start? Tomorrow. Today you go to the hospital. Be with your sister. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we begin your new role. I signed without letting myself think about it too much. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like I was signing away more than just 2 years of my professional life. But what choice did I have? Megan needed me. This was the only solution on the table. Dominic countersigned, handed me a copy, and tucked the original into his desk. Welcome to the inner circle, Lauren. I think you'll find it's not as frightening as you imagine. That remained to be seen. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hospital vigils and paperwork. Megan's surgery went perfectly. Dr. Rashid had repaired the displaced rib, set everything properly, and assured me she'd make a full recovery. The private room at Mercy Heights was nicer than some hotels I'd stayed in, and the nursing staff treated her like visiting royalty. When I finally told her about my job change, I kept it vague. More responsibility, better pay, opportunity for advancement. She was high on painkillers and mostly cared that I seemed less stressed than I had in months. You seem different, she'd said drowsily from her hospital bed. More settled or something. Settled wasn't the word I would have chosen. Committed, maybe. Trapped, possibly. But I smiled and told her everything was going to be fine. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:45, wanting to be early for my new role. Anthony met me at the elevator, his expression professionally neutral. "Miss Parker, welcome to the family. Mr. Bellini is expecting you." Family. Interesting word choice. The executive floor looked the same, but felt different now that I knew what really happened here. Every closed door represented secrets. Every hushed conversation another thread in whatever web Dominic had woven throughout the city. His office door stood open. Dominic sat at his desk, reviewing documents, wearing another immaculate suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked up when I entered, gestured to the chair across from him. "Good. You're early. I appreciate punctuality." He pushed a folder across the desk toward me. "Your first task. Review these contracts. Flag anything that seems problematic. They're for a shipping arrangement through the ports. Legitimate on paper, but you'll notice certain clauses that allow for flexible interpretation of cargo manifests." I opened the folder, scanned the first page. Import-export agreements, schedules, customs documentation that looked official, but had subtle discrepancies I wouldn't have noticed a week ago. What am I looking for specifically? Timing conflicts, anyone who might be double-dealing, any language that could expose us to unnecessary scrutiny. You have a good eye for detail. Use it. Over the next several hours, I dove into the documents. Dominic was right. I did have an eye for detail. I found 3 timing conflicts, 2 instances of suspicious redundancy in customs declarations, and 1 contract party whose background check revealed connections to organizations Dominic definitely didn't want involved in his operations. He reviewed my notes, nodded approvingly. "Excellent work. You just saved me from a deal that would have caused significant problems in 6 months." The praise shouldn't have felt as good as it did. That afternoon, I sat in on my first real meeting. 4 men in expensive suits, speaking in careful euphemisms about territory and arrangements and mutual benefits. I took notes, kept my expression neutral, and tried not to think too hard about what I was documenting. Dominic barely acknowledged my presence, which I appreciated. I wasn't there to contribute, just to observe and record. Afterward, back in his office, he explained what I'd actually witnessed. Protection agreements for businesses operating in contested areas, arrangements with port officials that ensured certain containers received expedited processing, payments to individuals who controlled access to resources Dominic's legitimate businesses needed. "It's all about leverage," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The world runs on who you know and what they owe you. My operations simply formalize those relationships in ways traditional business doesn't acknowledge." By the end of the first week, I'd seen enough to understand exactly what I'd gotten myself into. Dominic Bellini ran a sophisticated operation that blurred lines between legal and illegal so thoroughly that most people involved probably didn't realize which side they were on. He controlled shipping access, influenced port authority decisions, provided security services that probably overlapped with extortion, and maintained relationships with people who definitely had criminal connections. But he'd been honest about one thing. There was no direct violence, no drugs, no human trafficking. His empire was built on influence and information, not brutality. It didn't make it legal, but it made it something I could live with. Especially when I remembered Megan laughing from her hospital bed, pain-free and recovering beautifully in a facility I never could have afforded without Dominic's intervention. I'd made my choice. Now I just had to learn to live with it. Working this closely with Dominic changed things in ways I hadn't anticipated. By week 4, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Mornings reviewing documents in his office while he handled phone calls. Afternoons sitting in on meetings where coded language disguised illegal arrangements. Evenings compiling reports that would never see the inside of a courtroom. The work itself wasn't difficult. The moral implications were something I'd learned to compartmentalize, filing them away in a mental box labeled necessary compromises. What I hadn't prepared for was Dominic himself. The man I'd glimpsed during my 6 months as his secretary had been all sharp edges and calculated moves. This version, the one I saw now that I existed inside his inner circle, had unexpected dimensions that kept catching me off guard. Like the way he remembered every detail I'd ever mentioned about Megan. Not just her major or her school, but the fact that she'd struggled with organic chemistry last semester, that she wanted to specialize in criminal defense, that she volunteered at a legal aid clinic on weekends. He'd ask about her recovery with genuine interest, suggesting physical therapists when I mentioned she was having trouble with mobility exercises, recommending restaurants near her dorm when I said she'd been eating too much cafeteria food, or the library in his penthouse apartment, where he'd invited me once to review contracts that were too sensitive to leave at the office. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books that had clearly been read, pages marked with notes in his precise handwriting, philosophy, classic literature, economic theory, history. When he'd caught me staring at a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius, he'd pulled it down and shown me passages he'd underlined, offering observations about Stoic philosophy that revealed a mind constantly analyzing, questioning, seeking understanding. Most people think what I do is about power, he'd said, handing me the book. But it's really about control. Power is what others give you. Control is what you take for yourself. I'd borrowed the book, read it cover to cover that weekend, found myself thinking about his words more than I wanted to admit. Then there was his treatment of the people who worked for him. Anthony got a Christmas bonus that would have covered my entire year's salary before the raise. The cleaning staff at the office received premium health care and their children's college tuition. When one of his drivers had a family emergency, Dominic personally arranged for private medical transport and covered all expenses without being asked. Loyalty is earned, not demanded, he'd told me when I'd commented on his generosity. People who feel valued work harder, stay longer, keep their mouths shut when it matters. It was calculated, sure, but it was also effective, and watching him operate made me understand how he'd built an empire that existed in the shadows without anyone bothering to shine a light. The charity event in week 5 shattered my remaining ability to keep him at a comfortable emotional distance. "I need you to accompany me Saturday evening," he'd said Thursday afternoon, not looking up from the contract he was reviewing. "Formal event. Bring your sister if she's feeling up to it. The foundation I support is hosting a gala." I'd almost said no. Spending an evening with Dominic outside the office felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. But Megan had been cleared for light activity by then, and the chance to give her an evening of normalcy after weeks of hospitals and recovery was too good to pass up. The venue was a converted warehouse in the Arts District, decorated with an elegance that belied its industrial origins. String lights overhead, round tables draped in cream linens, a live band playing jazz that made the whole space feel intimate, despite the hundreds of people milling around. Dominic appeared in a tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of an old Hollywood film, all sharp lines and dangerous elegance. The scar on his chin caught the light as he greeted guests, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with an ease that surprised me. "This is the Tomorrow Foundation," he explained as we walked through the crowd. "We fund educational programs for children aging out of foster care. I started it 7 years ago. Why?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His expression shifted, something raw flickering across his features before the mask settled back into place. "Because I was one of those kids once. Foster care from age 12 to 18, bouncing between homes, nobody giving a damn if I graduated or ended up on the streets. My Uncle Giuseppe took me in after, gave me opportunities. But not everyone has a Giuseppe. Someone needs to fill that gap." The vulnerability in that admission hit me harder than anything I'd witnessed in his office. This wasn't the calculating crime boss or the ruthless businessman. This was a man who'd been abandoned by the system and had chosen to build something better for others experiencing the same fate. The evening continued with speeches and auctions, but what I remember most clearly was watching Dominic with the kids. About 20 teenagers aged 16 to 18 had been invited, all current participants in the Foundation's programs. They gravitated toward him naturally, chatting about school and jobs and their plans for the future. He remembered all their names, asked specific questions about their lives, offered advice that was surprisingly practical and kind. One girl was stressing about college applications, worried she'd never get accepted anywhere. Dominic spent 15 minutes reviewing her essay on his phone, making suggestions, connecting her with an admissions counselor he knew. "You're smart and driven," he told her. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in those spaces. You've earned your place there." The girl's eyes lit up like he'd handed her the world. Megan had watched the whole interaction from our table, then leaned over to whisper in my ear, "Okay, I get it now. He's not what I expected." Neither was I, apparently, because watching Dominic interact with those kids, seeing the genuine care he showed them, made something dangerous bloom in my chest that I knew I should kill before it took root. We didn't talk about it on the drive back to the office Monday morning, but something had shifted between us. The air felt charged in a way it hadn't before, awareness crackling in the spaces where our hands accidentally brushed passing documents, where our eyes met across the conference table during meetings. He started asking more personal questions. Not inappropriate, just interested. What had I wanted to be before circumstances forced me into the workforce? What did I do for fun when I wasn't working or caring for Megan? Did I have hobbies, passions, dreams that extended beyond survival? I wanted to be a lawyer. I admitted one afternoon when we were alone in his office, rain pattering against the windows. Constitutional law, specifically. Wanted to argue in front of the Supreme Court someday. Change precedents. Make real impact. Why didn't you? Because my parents died when Megan was 10 and I was 19. Someone had to work, pay bills, keep us housed and fed. Law school costs money I didn't have, and scholarships don't cover living expenses for two people. I shrugged, tried to make it sound less bitter than it felt. So I got a job, enrolled Megan in a good school district, and told myself I'd go back to college eventually. Eventually turned into 9 years. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. "It's not too late, you know. You could still pursue that degree. With what time? What money? You're smart, Lauren. Smarter than half the lawyers I employ. If you wanted it badly enough, you'd find a way." The words stung, because they were partially true, but also because he didn't understand the reality of my situation. Some dreams died not from lack of want, but from sheer impossibility. Week 7 brought Megan to the office for the first time since her surgery. She'd called asking if she could stop by before heading to her afternoon classes. Wanted to thank Dominic in person for everything he'd done for her recovery. I'd tried to discourage it, worried about Megan seeing too much or asking uncomfortable questions, but she'd been insistent. So I'd warned Dominic she was coming, asked him to keep things professional and surface level. He'd agreed with an amused expression that suggested he found my concern both unnecessary and endearing. Megan showed up at noon wearing jeans and a university sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, looking young and healthy and full of life. The sight of her walking normally, without the careful movements that had marked her first weeks post-surgery, made my throat tight. "You must be Megan." Dominic stood from behind his desk, extending his hand. "Lauren's told me wonderful things about you, Mr. Bellini." Megan shook his hand firmly, her sociology major manifesting in the way she met his eyes directly. "Thank you for everything. The surgery, the hospital, the way you helped my sister when she needed it most. I know you didn't have to do any of that. Your sister is an invaluable part of my organization. Taking care of family is part of how I do business." They talked for 20 minutes. Dominic asked about her classes, her research on criminal justice reform, her plans for after graduation. He recommended books she should read, professors at other universities whose work might interest her, internships that could give her practical experience. He treated her like an intelligent adult whose opinions mattered, not a child to be patronized. I watched them interact, seeing Megan's initial wariness melt into genuine engagement, and realized with growing horror that I was developing feelings I absolutely could not afford to have. Walking Megan back to the elevator, she'd turned to me with a knowing look. "He's into you." "What?" "No. He's my boss. It's professional. Lauren, come on. The way he looks at you when he thinks you're not paying attention, that's not professional. That's interested. You're imagining things. And you're in denial." She'd hugged me before stepping into the elevator. "Just be careful, okay? He seems nice, but he's also clearly powerful and probably dangerous. I don't want you getting hurt." I'd promised to be careful, but the truth was I had no idea how to protect myself from something I hadn't seen coming. Dominic Bellini had somehow become more than my employer, more than the criminal boss I'd agreed to serve. He'd become a person I respected, admired, and was terrifyingly close to caring about in ways that went far beyond professional obligation. That night, lying in bed staring at my ceiling, I acknowledged what I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. This job wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about keeping Megan safe or paying off debts. Somewhere between contract reviews and charity galas and conversations about Stoic philosophy, I'd started to see Dominic as someone I could actually fall for, which was absolutely the worst possible development in a situation that was already complicated beyond measure. The shift happened so gradually I almost missed it. Week 8 started with small changes that should have warned me something was coming. Extra security appeared at the building entrance, faces I didn't recognize checking IDs more thoroughly than usual. Dominic's meetings grew tense, voices raised behind closed doors in languages I couldn't understand. Anthony started carrying his weapon openly rather than concealed, a detail that made my stomach clench every time I noticed the bulge under his jacket. Territorial dispute, Dominic explained when I finally asked what was happening. We were alone in his office. Late afternoon sun streaming through windows that suddenly felt too exposed. Russians moving into areas I control. Man named Victor thinks he can push me out, absorb my operations. Is that likely? His jaw tightened, the only visible sign of anger. No, but it's going to get messy before it's resolved. I need you to be extra cautious. Vary your routes home. Don't stay late unless I'm here. Keep your phone charged at all times. The warning should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I felt oddly calm, like I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I'd signed that contract. Danger had always been implicit in this job. Now it was just becoming explicit. Week 9 started normally. Monday through Wednesday passed without incident, just heightened awareness and the constant presence of armed men in the hallways. Thursday I stayed late reviewing shipping manifests that needed to be finalized before morning. Dominic had left an hour earlier for a meeting across town, Anthony accompanying him. The office felt emptier than usual, most staff gone by 6. I was deep in spreadsheets when I heard it. Not a crash or anything dramatic. Just voices in the hallway that didn't belong, speaking Russian in urgent, clipped tones. Every instinct screamed danger. I killed my monitor, grabbed my phone, and dove under Dominic's massive desk. The space was cramped, barely large enough for my body, but the solid wood provided some illusion of safety. The office door slammed open. Footsteps, at least 2 sets, moving quickly through the room. Drawers being yanked open, papers rustling. The sound of someone rifling through Dominic's files. My heart hammered so loud I was certain they'd hear it. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to control my breathing, make myself smaller, invisible. Not here. Not like this. I couldn't leave Megan alone to finish a degree and a life we'd been building one rent check at a time. Nothing here, one voice said in heavily accented English. Check computer. More footsteps coming closer. I saw boots inches from where I huddled. Expensive leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The chair scraped as someone sat in Dominic's seat, directly above me. Keys clicking, frustrated cursing. Password protected. We need more time. We don't have time. Victor said in and out. 10 minutes maximum. Then we take hard drive. Crack it later. The chair rolled back suddenly, and I found myself staring at a man's face as he bent to look under the desk. Young, maybe late 20s, with cold eyes that widened in surprise when he saw me. We have problem, he called to his companion. Hands reached for me. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed as loud as possible and kicked out hard, catching him in the knee. He swore, stumbled backward, and I scrambled out from under the desk in the opposite direction. The second man blocked the door. Taller, broader, holding something dark and metallic that my brain registered as a gun before conscious thought could catch up. Don't move, he ordered. I froze, hands raised, mind racing through impossibilities. There was no way out, no windows I could reach, no secondary exit, no weapon I could grab. Just me and 2 armed men who'd come looking for information and found a witness instead. The first man recovered, advancing toward me with fury written across his features. You're coming with us. The hell I am. The defiance came from somewhere primal, survival instinct overriding common sense. He lunged. I grabbed the first thing my hand found, a heavy crystal paperweight from Dominic's desk, and swung it hard into his temple. The impact jarred my arm, sent pain shooting up to my shoulder, but he went down hard, blood immediately welling from the gash. The second man raised his gun. Time slowed, everything crystallizing into sharp focus. I was going to die in Dominic Bellini's office, killed by Russians looking for leverage in a war I barely understood. Then the door burst open behind the gunman. Anthony moved like violence incarnate, faster than should have been possible for a man his size. He hit the Russian from behind, the gun discharging into the ceiling, plaster raining down as they grappled. More men poured in. Dominic's security team, weapons drawn, shouting commands in English and Italian. The room erupted into chaos, fists and gunfire and bodies hitting furniture. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to become invisible again, watching the violence unfold with the strange detachment of shock. It ended in less than a minute. Both Russians down, one unconscious and bleeding, the other groaning but restrained. Anthony had a cut on his cheek, but otherwise appeared unharmed. He crossed to me in 3 strides, checking me over with professional efficiency. "You hurt?" I looked down, saw blood on my sleeve. A long cut along my forearm where something sharp had caught me during the struggle. The sight of it made my knees weak, adrenaline finally crashing and taking my equilibrium with it. Just that, I think. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Sit down before you fall down." He guided me to a chair, barking orders to his team in Italian. Someone called the police, or pretended to, I couldn't tell which. Someone else started cleaning up evidence of whatever had really happened here. 20 minutes later, Dominic arrived like a thunderstorm given human form. His face was controlled, calm, but fury radiated from every line of his body. He took in the scene with sharp eyes, noting the blood, the damaged office, Anthony's cut cheek, before his gaze landed on me. "Lauren," my name came out rough, strained. "What happened?" Anthony explained while I sat there trembling, shock finally catching up. Dominic listened without interruption, his expression growing colder with each detail. When Anthony finished, Dominic crouched in front of me, gentle hands tilting my arm to examine the cut. "This needs stitches." "It's fine. Just a scratch. Don't argue with me right now." He pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke in rapid Italian. Then he looked at Anthony. "Clean this up." "I'm taking her somewhere safe." "Your place?" "Yes. Her apartment isn't secure anymore. If Victor knows where she works, he knows where she lives." I should have protested. Should have insisted I could take care of myself, that I didn't need his protection. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. I absolutely did need his protection, because I'd just become a target in a war I'd never wanted any part of. Dominic helped me to my feet, his arm around my waist supporting more of my weight than I wanted to admit. The walk to his private elevator felt endless, every step a reminder of how close I'd come to something much worse than a cut arm. His car waited in the underground garage, black sedan with tinted windows. He settled me in the passenger seat with surprising gentleness, then drove through the city streets with focused intensity. "I'm sorry." His voice broke the silence as we merged onto the highway. "This should never have happened. You should never have been in danger. It's not your fault Victor decided to invade your office. It is my fault you were there to invade. This is my world, my war. You got caught in the crossfire because I dragged you into it. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made a choice. A choice I incentivized by holding your sister's medical care hostage to your compliance." The bitter self-recrimination in his tone surprised me. I'd never heard him sound anything less than confident, certain of his decisions and their consequences. "You gave me options when I had none. Don't rewrite history to make yourself the villain." He didn't respond, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. His mansion sat on 5 acres outside the city, protected by gates and security that made the office building look casual by comparison. The house itself was modern glass and steel, all clean lines and expensive architecture that somehow managed to feel warm, despite its size. Inside, Dominic guided me to a first-floor bathroom, sat me on the closed toilet lid, and retrieved a medical kit from under the sink. His hands were steady as he cleaned the cut, gentle as he applied butterfly bandages to close the edges. "It's not deep enough for stitches after all," he murmured. "But you'll have a scar. Seems appropriate. Battle wound from my first real brush with your enemies." His eyes met mine, amber catching light from the vanity. "I don't want you to have battle wounds. I want you safe." The intensity in those words made my breath catch. This wasn't boss protecting employee. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous and appealing in equal measure. "Where should I sleep?" I asked, needing to break the moment before I did something stupid like acknowledge the electricity crackling between us. "Second floor, east wing, suite next to mine. You'll have privacy but also immediate access if anything goes wrong." He finished bandaging my arm, sat back. "Stay here as long as you need. Your apartment isn't safe until I've dealt with Victor." I nodded, too exhausted to argue, too shaken to do anything except accept the protection he offered. That night, lying in a bed softer than anything I'd ever experienced, in a room larger than my entire apartment, I finally let myself process what had happened. I'd been attacked. Could have been killed or kidnapped. Only luck and Anthony's timing had saved me. And Dominic's response had been immediate, protective, personal in ways that had nothing to do with preserving a business asset. I was in so much deeper than I'd realized, and not just because of the danger. Living under Dominic's roof blurred every line I'd carefully maintained. The proximity was impossible to ignore. Shared morning coffee in his kitchen, passing in hallways late at night, the awareness of him sleeping just beyond a single wall. Week 11 arrived with tension that had nothing to do with Russians, and everything to do with the man who'd somehow become the center of my entire world. We worked from his home office most days, security concerns keeping us away from the main building. The space was smaller than his downtown office, more intimate, and that intimacy made every accidental touch feel charged with meaning. His hand brushing mine as we reached for the same document. Our shoulders bumping when we reviewed contracts side by side. The way his eyes lingered on my face when he thought I wasn't paying attention. "You're staring," I said one afternoon without looking up from my laptop. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "How much harder this is than I anticipated." His voice was low, honest in a way that made my breath catch. "Having you here, being this close and maintaining appropriate boundaries." I finally met his gaze. "Who says the boundaries are appropriate?" The question hung between us, dangerous and tempting. Dominic stood from his desk, moved to where I sat on the leather sofa, crouched in front of me so we were eye level. "Lauren, you work for me. You're here because I'm protecting you from enemies I created. The power imbalance alone makes any relationship between us problematic at best, exploitative at worst. What if I don't care about the power imbalance?" "You should. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the full truth. I exist in a world of violence and manipulation, and everyone close to me becomes a target." His amber eyes searched my face. "You deserve better than what I can offer. Stop deciding what I deserve. I'm an adult. I can make my own choices." "Can you? Or are you just suffering from proximity and adrenaline, confusing gratitude with something else?" The question made me angry in ways I didn't expect. "You think I'm that simple? That I can't tell the difference between appreciation and genuine feeling?" I leaned forward, close enough to feel the heat of his breath. "I've spent 3 months watching you, seeing how you treat people, how you think, what drives you. This isn't gratitude. This is me recognizing that despite everything you've done, everything you are, I'm falling for you anyway." His control cracked. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the slight hitch in his breathing. "Lauren," I kissed him before he could find another reason to push me away. His response was immediate, one hand cupping the back of my neck, the other gripping my hip as he kissed me back with intensity that bordered on desperation. 3 months of tension, of wanting and denying, poured into that contact. We broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. My heart raced so fast I felt dizzy, every nerve ending alive with want. "I can't," I whispered, reality crashing back. "God, I want to, but I can't." Dominic pulled back slightly, confusion replacing the heat in his expression. "Why?" "Because you could die." The words tumbled out raw and terrified. This war with Victor, it's escalating. You said yourself it's going to get messy. What happens when you go to one of these meetings and don't come back? I've already lost my parents. I can't lose you too. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that. I stood, needing distance, pacing the room like a caged animal. And Megan. If something happens to me because I'm with you, she's alone. 19 years old, no family, nobody to support her through college and the law school she's aiming for. I can't risk her future for this, no matter how much I want it. Dominic rose to his full height, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Those are legitimate concerns. I know they are. That's why I'm saying no, even though every part of me is screaming yes. He crossed the room, stopped me mid-pace with gentle hands on my shoulders. Then I'll wait, however long it takes for you to feel safe, for this situation with Victor to resolve, for you to trust that loving me won't destroy everything else you care about. I'm a patient man when it matters. What if the wait is years? Then it's years. His thumb traced my cheekbone with heartbreaking tenderness. You're worth waiting for, Lauren. Worth doing this right instead of rushing into something neither of us is ready for. I wanted to argue, to tell him I was ready, that we could figure everything else out together. But the fear was real and consuming, and he deserved honesty more than false bravado. Thank you, I managed, for understanding. I understand fear. I've lived with it my entire adult life. He released me, stepped back. But I meant what I said. My feelings aren't temporary or convenient. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. Week 12 shattered whatever fragile equilibrium we'd established. The call came during dinner. Dominic's phone rang with a number he clearly recognized, his expression going cold and hard. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then ended the call without speaking. What happened? I asked, though dread already curdled in my stomach. Victor has my contador. Man named Paul Chow, who handles all financial records for the legitimate businesses. They're demanding a meeting tomorrow night. Neutral territory. Just me and Victor to discuss terms. It's a trap. Obviously. He stood, already mentally shifting into strategy mode. But if I don't go, they'll execute Paul on camera and send it to every organization I have relationships with. Make me look weak, unwilling to protect my people. It'll invite challenges from every direction. So you risk walking into an ambush to save face? I risk walking into an ambush to maintain the reputation that keeps my people safe. His voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing a business lunch rather than potential death. Reputation in this world is everything. Show weakness once and you'll be fighting wars for the next decade. Anthony arrived 20 minutes later, his expression grim. They disappeared into Dominic's study for 2 hours, emerging with what I assumed was some kind of plan. Neither would tell me the details, just that Dominic would attend the meeting with minimal security and hope his contingency plans were sufficient. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in my comfortable bed staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways tomorrow could go catastrophically wrong. Around midnight, I gave up pretending rest was possible and went downstairs for water. Dominic sat in the living room, lights off, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the grounds beyond. He didn't turn when I entered, but his voice acknowledged my presence. Can't sleep either? How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. The admission was quiet, vulnerable in ways he rarely allowed, but showing fear doesn't change outcomes. It just makes everyone around me more afraid. I sat beside him on the leather sofa, our shoulders touching. Don't go. Please. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not one that doesn't result in more violence, more people hurt. This way, it's contained. Me, Victor, our people. No civilians caught in crossfire. No extended war that destroys everything I've built. You keep talking about this like it's already decided. It is decided. Has been since the moment they took Paul. He finally looked at me, amber eyes reflecting city lights from outside. I need you to understand something. If this goes badly tomorrow, there are provisions in place. Accounts in your name, documents that will ensure Megan's education is fully funded, connections to help you both start somewhere new if necessary. You'll be taken care of. I don't want to be taken care of. I want you alive. I'm going to do everything in my power to make that happen. But if I can't, I kissed him to shut him up, to stop the awful finality in his voice. This kiss was different from the first, less desperate and more deliberate, a conscious choice to take what I wanted despite every logical reason to walk away. When we broke apart this time, neither of us pulled back. "Stay with me tonight," I whispered. "If tomorrow might not exist, I want tonight. All of it. Lauren, I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Fear and logic and appropriate boundaries be damned. I want tonight." He studied my face for a long moment, searching for hesitation or doubt. Found only determination and want, and the kind of reckless courage that comes from staring at potential loss. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed me again, slowly this time, taking his time like we had all the hours in the world instead of just the night. His hands were gentle, reverent, mapping my body with careful attention that made me feel precious rather than simply desired. We made it to his room somehow, shedding clothes and inhibitions with equal urgency. The first time was fast, months of denied want finally finding release. The second was slower, exploratory, learning each other's responses and preferences. By the third, exhaustion and satisfaction had mellowed us into something almost peaceful. I lay with my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, and tried to memorize everything about this moment. The feel of his skin against mine, the way his fingers traced absent patterns on my shoulder, the safety of being held by someone who'd somehow become my entire world. "Come back to me tomorrow," I said into the darkness. "I promise to try." "That's not the same as promising you will." "It's the only promise I can make honestly." His arms tightened around me. "But know that I have every intention of surviving this. Too much waiting for me here now to do anything stupid." Morning came too fast. Dominic left before 6 months after the warehouse and 4. Since the proposal, Dawn found us on the terrace again. Dawn, kissing me one final time with an intensity that felt like both promise and goodbye. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the drive, taking my heart with it into whatever hell awaited at that meeting. All I could do now was wait and pray that promises and contingency plans would be sufficient to bring him home. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. I'd positioned myself in the living room where I had a clear view of the driveway, phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline, checking the time every 30 seconds even though I knew it wouldn't make Dominic return any faster. 7 p.m. The meeting was supposed to start at 6. How long did these things take? How long before I knew whether he was coming home, or whether I'd just spent my first and last night with him? Anthony had left 2 guards at the mansion, both posted outside with strict instructions not to let anyone through the gates. Their presence should have been comforting. Instead, it just reminded me how real the danger was. 8 p.m. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd tried sitting, pacing, making tea I didn't drink, anything to occupy my mind. Nothing worked. Every scenario my imagination conjured was worse than the last. Dominic wounded, bleeding out in some abandoned warehouse. Dominic captured, tortured for information. Dominic dead before he ever had a chance to fight back. Stop. Thinking like that wouldn't help anyone. My phone rang at 8:43, Anthony's number lighting up the screen. I answered before the first ring finished. "Is he alive? Coming home? Bad night, but he's alive." Anthony's voice was rough, strained. "ETA 15 minutes. Get the medical kit from upstairs bathroom. Bring it to the front entrance." "How bad?" "Bad enough. Move, Lauren." I moved, sprinted up the stairs, grabbed the extensive first aid kit Dominic kept stocked, ran back down. The guards had opened the gates, both of them standing at attention with weapons drawn. Not a good sign. Headlights appeared at the end of the drive. Not Dominic's usual sleek sedan, but a larger SUV, driving too fast, weaving slightly. It screeched to a stop at the entrance. The passenger door opened, and Anthony half fell out, clutching his left shoulder where blood had soaked through his jacket. "Help him," Anthony gasped, gesturing to the driver's side. Dominic emerged under his own power, but moved like every step cost him. His shirt was torn, dark with blood that looked black under the security lights. A gash across his cheekbone still bled freely, and he was favoring his right side in a way that suggested broken or cracked ribs. But he was alive, walking, breathing. That was all that mattered. I reached him just as his knees buckled, caught him as best I could, his weight nearly dragging us both down. One of the guards moved to help, supporting Dominic's other side as we hauled him into the house. "Living room," I directed. "Lay him on the couch. Anthony, sit in the chair. Let me see that shoulder." "I'm fine. Boss first. You're both getting treated right now." My voice came out sharp, commanding, years of managing crisis with Megan kicking in. "Someone call a doctor." "Not hospital. The private one Dominic used for Megan's surgery." One guard moved to make the call while I assessed the damage. Dominic's shirt came off in pieces, revealing a collection of cuts and bruises that made my hands shake. The worst was a deep gash along his ribs that definitely needed stitches. His face was a mess, but the bleeding had started to slow. "Lauren." His voice was hoarse. "I'm okay. You're not okay. You're barely conscious and bleeding all over your expensive couch." I pressed gauze against the rib wound, applying pressure. "What happened?" "Ambush. Like we expected. Victor brought 15 men, we had 6. He winced as I cleaned the facial cut. Anthony got me out. Explosives we planted beforehand gave us cover to escape. "Paul?" Pain flickered across his features. "Dead when we found him. Victor executed him hours before the meeting. Used his body as bait. The waste of it hit me hard. A man dead just to lure Dominic into a trap. His life worth nothing more than tactical positioning." "Victor?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the grim set of Dominic's jaw. "Dead. Won't be a problem anymore." He caught my wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "It's over, Lauren. The war. The threat. We won. At what cost?" I gestured to his injuries, to Anthony bleeding quietly in the chair. "How many people died tonight?" 3 of my men, plus Paul, plus Victor and most of his organization." He closed his eyes briefly. Too high a price for territory and pride. The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, a thin man in his 50s who'd clearly made this type of house call before. He worked efficiently, stitching Dominic's rib wound, treating Anthony's shoulder where a bullet had grazed but not penetrated, dispensing antibiotics and pain medication. "You're lucky," he told Dominic. "Another inch on that rib wound, and you'd have been looking at organ damage. As is, you'll be sore for weeks, but you'll heal." After he left, after Anthony had been helped to a guest room by the guards, after everyone else had finally cleared out, it was just me and Dominic in the sudden quiet of the living room. "You promised you'd try to come back," I said, perched on the edge of the couch next to him. "And I did. Kept my word. You look like hell. Feel like it too." He reached up, touched my face with surprising gentleness given the night he'd had. "But I'm here. We're both here. That's what matters." Relief crashed over me with physical force, followed immediately by anger so intense it made my vision blur. "You could have died. You walked into that warehouse knowing it was a trap, and you could have died. I know. Don't ever do that to me again. Don't make me wait while you risk your life for territory or reputation or whatever the hell you were fighting for tonight." My voice broke. "I can't lose you. Not now. Not after last night. I'm sorry." He pulled me down carefully, mindful of his injuries, until I was lying against his uninjured side. "I'm so sorry I put you through that." I kissed him because words weren't sufficient for the tangle of emotion choking me. Relief and anger and desperate love all mixed together into something too big to contain. He kissed me back despite the pain it must have caused, his hand threading through my hair, holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world gone sideways. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his expression had softened into something vulnerable I'd never seen before. "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it last night, should have said it weeks ago. But I love you, Lauren Parker. Completely, and probably unwisely, but undeniably." The words hit harder than any confession he'd ever made about his business dealings or his past. "I love you too. Which is why you can never scare me like that again. I'll try my best to avoid near-death experiences. Though given my line of work, I can't promise they won't happen. Then maybe it's time to consider a different line of work." He studied me for a long moment. "You're serious. The war's over. Victor's gone. This is your chance to step back, transition more operations to legitimate business, reduce your exposure to the violent side of things. I traced the bandage on his cheek carefully. You don't have to leave it all overnight, but you could start moving away from the worst of it. For you, for us, for whatever future we might build together if you manage to survive long enough to see it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips despite the split that must have hurt. Bossy. I like it. Get used to it. Someone has to keep you alive since you clearly can't be trusted with your own safety. The next few days brought cascading consequences of Victor's elimination. Federal attention intensified as promised. Agents showing up asking questions about the warehouse incident that had left bodies scattered across an industrial district. Dominic's lawyers handled it with practiced efficiency, pointing to security footage showing Victor's men as the aggressors, establishing clear self-defense justification. 3 funerals for the men who'd died protecting Dominic. I attended all of them, watching him speak about loyalty and sacrifice and family, seeing how much each loss cost him despite the careful mask he maintained. Paul's funeral was the hardest. His wife and 2 young children stood at the graveside, their grief a physical presence. Dominic had established a trust fund for the kids' education, paid off the family's mortgage, and set up a pension for the widow that would keep her comfortable for life. It didn't bring Paul back, but it was something. I'm responsible for this, he'd told me the night after Paul's funeral. My war, my decisions, his death. Victor was responsible for Paul's death. You're responsible for ensuring his family doesn't suffer more than they already have. There's a difference. By week 16, the immediate crisis had passed. The federal investigation found no grounds to pursue charges. Dominic had consolidated his territory, absorbed Victor's legitimate operations, and begun the careful process of divesting from the more dangerous aspects of his empire. It'll take years, he'd explained one evening, as we reviewed documents in his study. Can't just walk away overnight without inviting chaos. Not perfection, just progress. He'd pulled me into his lap then, wrapping careful arms around me despite his ribs still healing. I meant what I said. I love you. Whatever changes need to happen for us to have a future together, I'll make them happen. And watching his amber eyes, seeing the sincerity there, I believed him. The offer came 2 weeks after the warehouse incident, after Dominic's bruises had faded to yellow-green and his stitches had been removed. We were having breakfast on his terrace, morning sun warming the flagstones, when he set down his coffee with deliberate care. I need to give you something. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, slid it across the table. Open it. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000 made out to me, along with a letter of recommendation on his company letterhead that made me sound like the most competent professional in the entire state. What is this? Your exit strategy. The war's over. The immediate danger has passed. You fulfilled your contract obligations and then some. If you want to leave, build a life somewhere else away from all of this, you can. His voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the tension in his shoulders. No strings attached. No conditions. Just freedom to choose your own path. I stared at the check, at the number that represented complete financial independence. More money than I'd ever had at once. Enough to relocate, start fresh, maybe even go back to school. Everything I might have wanted 6 months ago. Why are you doing this? Because I forced you into this position originally. Used Megan's medical needs as leverage to ensure your compliance. That was wrong, and I want to correct it. He met my eyes directly. I don't want you staying out of obligation or fear. If you're going to be in my life, I need it to be because you genuinely want to be, not because you feel trapped. The vulnerability in that admission hit hard. Dominic Bellini, who controlled an empire and commanded absolute loyalty from dozens of people, was giving me the power to walk away from him completely. And if I stay, then we build something real together. Not employer and employee, not captor and captive. Partners in every sense. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of his body. I love you, Lauren. That's not going to change whether you're here or across the country. But I want you to have the choice I never gave you before. I folded the envelope, set it aside. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. The next 3 days were torturous. I moved through my routines mechanically, reviewing documents and attending meetings while my mind churned through possibilities. I could leave, start over somewhere safe, somewhere normal, where the man I loved didn't have enemies willing to kill for territory. Build the quiet, stable life I'd always imagined for myself and Megan, but that life felt hollow now. Empty, because somewhere in the past 4 months, this had become home. Not the mansion or the job, but Dominic himself. The conversations that lasted until dawn, the way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met, how he made me feel challenged and valued and seen in ways I'd never experienced. Leaving meant safety. Staying meant risk. But it also meant love and partnership and building something meaningful from the complicated mess we'd started with. The decision, when I finally made it, felt inevitable. I'm staying, I told him on the 4th morning, finding him in his study reviewing contracts. Not because I feel trapped or obligated. Because I want this. Want us. Want to build whatever future we can create together despite the complications. Relief transformed his features, the careful control he'd maintained for days finally cracking. He stood, crossed to where I leaned against his desk, framed my face with both hands. You're sure? No doubts? Plenty of doubts. But they're outweighed by certainty that leaving would be the biggest mistake of my life. He kissed me then, deep and thorough and full of promises neither of us could guarantee, but both wanted desperately to keep. When we finally broke apart, he kept me close, forehead pressed to mine. We need to restructure everything. New roles, new dynamic. I want you as COO of the legitimate operations. Real position with real authority, not just glorified secretary managing my schedule. That's a massive responsibility. You're capable of handling it. You've been essentially doing it already, just without the title or compensation. His amber eyes searched my face. $15,000 a month, full equity stake in the companies, seat on the board. You'll have genuine power to shape the direction of the business. The salary made my breath catch. $15,000 monthly was obscene, more than I'd ever imagined earning, but it was also merit-based, tied to a legitimate role rather than hush money for illegal knowledge. The operations you're trying to distance yourself from? I'm promoting people to handle those. Not abandoning them overnight. That would cause chaos. But gradually shifting my focus to clean business, while trusted lieutenants manage the transition. He released me, moved to his desk, pulled out folders. It'll take years to fully legitimize everything. But the trajectory changes now. We spent the next week restructuring his entire organization. I officially became Chief Operating Officer of Bellini Enterprises, overseeing the import business, real estate holdings, and restaurant ventures. Dominic remained CEO but began systematically divesting from anything that couldn't withstand federal scrutiny. The changes weren't dramatic or immediate, but they were real, measurable progress toward something sustainable. Week 17 brought the conversation I'd been dreading. Megan called asking if she could visit, said she needed to talk about something important. The seriousness in her voice made my stomach clench. She arrived Saturday morning looking determined and nervous in equal measure. I made tea, settled us in the living room, and waited for whatever was coming. I did some research. She started carefully. About Dominic, about Bellini Enterprises, about the warehouse incident that made the news a few weeks ago. My heart sank. Megan, I'm not stupid, Lauren. I know something's been off since you started working for him. The money, the security, the way you moved into his house. So I looked into it. She met my eyes directly. He's involved in organized crime, isn't he? Not dramatically, not like movies, but enough that his business operates outside legal boundaries. Lying would have been pointless. Megan was too smart, had too much information already. So I told her an edited version of the truth. The arrangement Dominic had offered when she needed surgery. My role handling sensitive aspects of his operations. The danger that had necessitated moving into his home for protection. I left out the worst details. The execution I'd witnessed that first week. The full extent of the violence. Exactly how close I'd come to being killed or kidnapped. But I gave her enough to understand the reality of what I'd gotten involved in. And now? She asked when I finished. Are you still in danger? Less than before. The territorial war ended. Dominic's transitioning toward more legitimate operations. It's not perfect, not completely safe, but it's improving. And you love him. Not a question. I nodded anyway. Megan was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd told her. Then she surprised me by laughing, short and slightly hysterical. Of course my responsible, rule-following sister would fall for a crime boss. Of course that's how our lives would go. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. Should have been honest. You protected me. That's what you always do. She reached across, squeezed my hand. I'm not happy about the danger or the illegal aspects, but I see how you look at him, and more importantly, how he looks at you. Like you're the center of his universe. That's worth something. You're okay with this? I'm accepting of this. There's a difference. She pulled her hand back, expression turning serious. But Lauren, if he hurts you, if he puts you in danger unnecessarily, if he takes advantage of the power imbalance between you, I will make his life absolutely miserable. I don't care how powerful he is or how dangerous his associates are. You're my sister. Nothing comes before that. Dominic, who'd been giving us privacy, chose that moment to appear in the doorway. Fair warning, Miss Parker. I'd expect nothing less. Megan stood, faced him directly despite being a foot shorter and about 100 pounds lighter. Lauren says you're transitioning to legitimate business. I am. It's a gradual process, but yes. Good. Because if anything happens to her because of your criminal activities, you'll regret it. She softened slightly. But if you treat her right, if you make her happy and keep her safe, then I guess I can accept you being part of our family. I intend to do exactly that. Dominic's voice was sincere, that rare vulnerability showing through. Your sister means everything to me. Protecting her, ensuring her happiness. That's not negotiable. What happened next surprised me. Dominic explained his plan to fund Megan's law school completely, had already researched programs that aligned with her interest in criminal justice reform, and had connections to firms offering internships that would give her practical experience without compromising her ethics. This isn't payment for your silence or acceptance, he clarified. Your sister already earned this through her work, but I want to ensure you have every opportunity to pursue your goals without financial stress limiting your options. Megan looked at me, silently asking if this was okay. I nodded. She deserved this support, deserved to build the future she'd worked so hard toward. Thank you, she told Dominic carefully. I appreciate it, and I'll make the most of the opportunities. After she left, Dominic and I stood on the terrace watching the sun set over the grounds, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder, everything feeling settled in a way it hadn't since that first day I'd broken down crying in the supply closet. She's going to keep an eye on me, he observed. She absolutely is. Megan's protective. Good. You deserve people who'll call me out if I mess this up. He kissed the top of my head. Federal investigation is quieting down, by the way. The lawyers I hired are managing it well. We're going to build something real, Lauren. Something worth all the complications we went through to get here. Looking at him, at the life we were constructing together from impossible beginnings, I finally believed him. 6 months transformed everything in ways both subtle and profound. My role as COO became real rather than ceremonial, managing the legitimate arms of Dominic's empire with increasing confidence. The import business expanded into new markets. The restaurant ventures opened 2 additional locations, and the real estate holdings grew through strategic acquisitions that would have made my abandoned law school professors proud. The $15,000 monthly salary felt earned rather than extravagant. I worked 60-hour weeks, attended board meetings where my voice carried actual weight, made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Dominic had given me genuine authority, and I'd proven capable of wielding it responsibly. Our relationship became public knowledge among his associates by week 19. Not through any dramatic announcement, just the natural recognition that came from us arriving together at meetings, from the way he deferred to my judgment on business matters, from how we moved through spaces like 2 parts of a whole, rather than boss and subordinate. The respect I received surprised me most. These men who'd spent decades in Dominic's world treated me as an equal, valued my input, accepted my presence in discussions about territory and arrangements without question. Partly because Dominic had made it clear my position was non-negotiable, but also because I'd proven I could navigate their complicated world without flinching. "You're better at this than I expected," Anthony told me one afternoon, after a particularly tense negotiation with a supplier who'd tried to inflate prices. I'd held firm, walked away from the table, and gotten a call an hour later accepting our original terms. Most people fold under pressure. You don't. I learned from watching Dominic, and from years of managing crisis with Megan. Compared to keeping a teenager fed and in school on limited resources, business negotiations are relatively straightforward. The federal investigation concluded in week 22 with no charges filed. Dominic's army of lawyers had done their job. The legitimate businesses withstood scrutiny, and the evidence connecting him to illegal operations was insufficient to prosecute. Not because those connections didn't exist, but because he'd been methodical about insulation and documentation. "We're clear," he'd told me the evening the final report came through. "Officially, legally clear, which means we can start planning for actual futures instead of just survival." That conversation led to week 24 and the moment that changed everything. We were in his study, late evening, reviewing quarterly projections. Boring, routine work that somehow felt intimate when shared. Dominic closed his laptop, set it aside, and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I have a question to ask you." Something in his tone made my heart accelerate. "Okay, we've built something real here. Partnership, love, mutual respect. You've proven you're capable of handling this world, thriving in it even. And I've proven I'm capable of change, of prioritizing you over territory or pride." He reached across the desk, took my hand. "I want to make it official, not just professionally but personally. Marry me, Lauren." No grand gesture. No ring produced from a hidden pocket. Just Dominic being characteristically direct, asking for what he wanted with the straightforward honesty that had become the foundation of everything between us. "You're sure?" I asked, because this was permanent in ways our current arrangement wasn't. "Marriage means legal entanglement, shared liability, everything that comes with formally binding your life to mine. I'm aware of the implications. I want all of them. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're legally, officially, permanently mine. I want to build a family with you, raise children who'll never know the kind of instability either of us grew up with. I want to grow old arguing about business strategy and still finding you as fascinating at 70 as I do at 35. The vision he painted was so compelling, so different from anything I'd imagined for myself a year ago. Yes, absolutely yes. His relief was palpable, the tension draining from his shoulders as he pulled me across the desk into his lap. Thank you for choosing this, for choosing me despite every logical reason to run. Logic is overrated. Love is better. We married 8 months later in a ceremony that perfectly represented who we'd become. Small gathering at the mansion, maybe 30 people total. Megan stood beside me as maid of honor, wearing a navy dress she'd picked out herself, looking proud and slightly emotional. Anthony served as Dominic's best man. The scar on his cheek from the warehouse incident barely visible now, his expression approving in ways I'd learned to recognize as high praise. The guest list was carefully curated, family in every sense that mattered. Dominic's key associates and their partners, staff members who'd become friends, a handful of Megan's law school classmates who'd helped keep her grounded during my transition into this complicated life. No press, no publicity, just people who genuinely cared about our happiness. I was 3 months pregnant by then. Not showing yet, but aware of the life growing inside me in ways that made everything feel both terrifying and perfect. Dominic knew, had been there when I'd taken the test, had immediately started planning for nurseries and childcare and all the practical considerations that came with impending parenthood. You're going to be an amazing mother, he'd told me that night, hands gentle on my still flat stomach. Our kid is incredibly lucky to have you. Our kid is going to have questions about their father's past. Then we'll answer them honestly when they're old enough to understand. I'm not ashamed of where I came from or how I built this empire, but I am committed to ensuring they grow up with better options than I had. The wedding ceremony itself was brief, officiated by a judge Dominic had known for years. Traditional vows that felt revolutionary given everything we'd survived to reach this moment. When he slipped the platinum ring onto my finger, I understood this was real in ways contracts and arrangements had never been. The reception lasted into the early morning hours, music and laughter filling spaces that had once felt dangerous and uncertain. I danced with Dominic, with Anthony, with Megan, who whispered in my ear that she'd never seen me look happier. "You found what you needed," she said. "I'm proud of you for being brave enough to take it." By the time guests finally departed, exhaustion and satisfaction had mellowed us both into something peaceful. Dominic and I stood on the terrace, where we'd shared so many significant conversations, watching the sun rise over grounds that had become home in every sense that mattered. "Any regrets?" he asked, arm around my waist, his other hand resting protectively over where our child grew. I thought about that day in the supply closet, about breaking down because I couldn't solve an impossible crisis, about Dominic finding me at my lowest point and offering solutions that had led here, to this moment, to this life I'd never imagined wanting. None. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be, even with all the complications, especially with the complications. They made us who we are. He kissed me as morning light painted everything gold, and I felt the kind of bone-deep contentment I'd spent 28 years searching for without knowing what I needed. I'd started working part-time by then, enrolled in an MBA program that challenged me in new ways while giving me flexibility for impending motherhood. Dominic had continued distancing himself from illegal operations, appointing trusted people to handle the transition while he focused on legitimate growth. Not perfect, not completely clean, but moving steadily in the right direction. Standing there in his arms, I understood something fundamental about happiness. It doesn't come from perfect circumstances or ideal beginnings. It comes from finding someone willing to build something meaningful from whatever broken pieces you start with. It comes from choosing each other repeatedly despite every obstacle. It comes from partnership forged in crisis and strengthened through survival. Dominic Bellini had found me crying in a closet, desperate and drowning. He'd offered me a lifeline that was also a cage. But somewhere in the months that followed, the cage had become a home, the captor had become a partner, and I'd discovered that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. I wouldn't change any of it. Not the fear, not the danger, not the moral compromises I'd made to get here. Because all of it had led to this. Sunrise over the grounds of a mansion that was truly ours. A child growing inside me. A man beside me who'd proven love could exist even in the darkest corners of complicated worlds. The secretary who'd hidden in a closet had found something better than escape. She'd found purpose, partnership, and a future worth fighting for. And that, I'd learned, was worth every risk I'd taken to claim it.